In this screencast, we are going to talk about two concepts, the first one being equivalent ratios, and the second being simplest form. The simplest form kind of goes along with equivalent ratios, so that's why we're putting them both in the same video. So let's go ahead and start by talking about equivalent ratios. If you think back to elementary school, you learned about equivalent fractions. And when you were finding equivalent fractions, you used two methods. You could either multiply or you could divide. When you are using multiplication, you need to just make sure that you are multiplying the top and the bottom number by the same number. You can multiply by any number, but you have to make sure that you're doing it to both the top and the bottom. Division is a little bit more complicated. You have to make sure that you are looking for a number that is in common between the two numbers. So you have to look for a common number that you can divide into both the numerator and the denominator. So let's take a look at equivalent ratios, and we're using the idea of multiplication first. So your first step would be to write the ratio in fraction form. Then you're going to multiply the ratio by any number. Whatever number you multiply on the top or by the top, you have to also multiply by the bottom. So let's take a look at an example. Once again, we have our directions written on the side, 1, 2, and 3, and you'll see the example 4 boys to 5 girls. So I'm going to go ahead and do my first step. It says write the ratio in fraction form. So I'm going to put 4 over 5. You can either keep the labels or you don't have to. It's up to you. I'm going to multiply the ratio by any number. 2 is a pretty easy number to always multiply by, so I'm going to use the number 2. 4 times 2 is going to get me to 8. 5 times 2 is going to get me to 10. So this is telling me that when I multiply by 2, I would get a ratio of 8/10, and these two ratios, 4/5 and 8/10, are equivalent. Looking at the rules for division, once again, we're going to write the ratio in fraction form, and then we have to find a common factor or a common number to divide into both the top and bottom numbers. So that's where our common factors are coming back into play. Can we divide both numbers by 2, by 3, and so on? Some numbers you may want to think about is, I'm just going to write these down here at the bottom. Can we divide by 2, 3, 5, 7? Those are some prime numbers that will probably be in common with both your top and bottom numbers. So let's take a look. For example, we have 12 dogs to 10 cats. So first step is to write that in fraction form. And then I'm going to look at 12 and 10. Remember I talked about your common numbers that you'll divide by. So you could divide by 2, 3, 5, 7. So if we take a look at I would always start with the smallest number. So I would start with the number 2. Can 12 be divided by 2? Yes. Can 10 be divided by 2? Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and divide by 2 on the top and the bottom. Notice I'm doing the same thing to both numbers. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Here's an equivalent ratio because I'm dividing by 2. So 12/10 is equal to 6/5. Now it's your turn. I'd like you to try multiplying 2/3 by something. Remember to do the same number on the top and the bottom, and to do 5, 6 times something, same number top and bottom. Then you're going to do 2 examples for division. Think about what can you divide into both 10 and 15, and what can you divide into both 20 and 16. So if you take a look at my examples, you'll see that I multiplied by 3. For my first example, you could have multiplied by 2 on the top and bottom, 3, 4, 10, whatever number. Same thing for the second example. I decided to multiply by 10. You don't have to multiply by the same thing as me. You could have multiplied by 2, 3, 4, 7, 20, whatever you wanted to multiply by. Division is where it gets a little bit more tricky, where you actually don't have as many choices because you have to look for that common factor or that common number to divide into both the top and the bottom. So for number 1, I divided by 5. That's the only common factor between 10 and 15. And I got an equivalent ratio of 2/3, or 2/3. For number 2, I chose to divide by 2. You could have also divided by 4. So when I divided by 2, I got 10/8. If you chose to divide by 4, you would have gotten 5/4. All of these are equivalent to one another. So let's go ahead and move into the idea of simplest form. And some of the ratios that we found on the previous slide were actually in simplest form. Some key words that you'll see in addition to simplest form are reducing or simplifying. So reducing and simplifying really means that we're making things smaller. And if we think about when we're making things smaller, we are using the idea of division. So when we are simplifying something, we're using division. If you take a look at the example down here at the bottom, you'll see that I started with 20/24. I chose to divide by 2 because I know that both of these numbers are even. That got me to 10/12. I knew that 10/12 was also even. Both of those numbers were even, so I divided by 2 again and got to 5/6. If I take a look at 5/6, I see that there are no other common factors or common numbers between 5 and 6, so that is in simplest form. Let's go ahead and take a look at this little bit of our note sheet. So we have talked about simplifying ratios before in class, and this just says to simplify a ratio, first write the ratio in blank form and then simplify by blank each number in the ratio by a common factor. So let's back up a little bit and let's go ahead and take a look at the first blank. And it says to simplify a ratio, first write the ratio in fraction form. And then to simplify, think about what operation I just mentioned on the slide before. We're going to use the idea of division, and we're going to simplify by dividing each number in the ratio by a common factor. So it has to be a shared number, a number that they share. If you take a look at the second part, this definition is talking about simplest form, which is the focus of this part of our video. Simplest form is when the GCF of the numerator and denominator, or of the top and the bottom, is 1, basically meaning that both numbers are as small as they can get. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first example of 12/15. If I look at 12 and 15, I want you to think of the numbers that we talked about before. Most times you're going to divide by 2, 3, 5, or 7. So let's go ahead and start with 2. Can I divide 2 into both of these numbers? I can divide 2 into 12, but I cannot divide 2 into 15 because it's not even. Can I divide 3 into both numbers? I can divide 3 into 12, and I can divide 3 into 15. So I'm going to go ahead and use 3 to simplify my ratio. 12 divided by 3, 15 divided by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4, 15 divided by 3 is 5. I'm going to take a look at this ratio, 4/5. Are there any other numbers that I could divide into both 4 and 5 in my list? Not 2, not 3, not 5, not 7. So that means that in simplest form, 12/15 would be written as 4/5. Go ahead and try 32/18 and see what you can come up with. Remember that you are dividing, so I know that both of these numbers are even, so I'm going to go ahead and start by dividing by 2. And I know that half of 32, or 32 divided by 2, is 16. I know that half of 18, or 18 divided by 2, is 9. I'm going to go ahead and look and see, can I divide by 2 again? No. Can I divide by 3? No. Can I divide by 5? No. Can I divide by 7? No. So if I take a look at 16/9, even though 16 is a pretty large number, 16 and 9 do not share any other common factors, so 32/18 in simplest form would be 16/9. So what you're going to do now is you are going to go ahead and write each ratio in simplest form. So if you take a look at the screen, you're going to start with 10 to 12, 8 to 6, 14 to 20, and 5 to 15. Remember what we've talked about with our steps for simplifying a ratio or putting a ratio in simplest form. You should be writing each ratio as a fraction and then dividing it by a common factor. Once you think you have your answers, go ahead and hit play and check your answers with mine. You'll see that for the first example, I got 5/6. Second example, I got 7/10. Third example, 4/3, and fourth example, 1/3. Make sure that you are being really careful with what you're dividing by and that you are dividing by the same number on the top and the bottom of your ratio. So once again, equivalent ratios you can multiply, divide. Simplest form, you are using the idea of division.